Okay, well, since the challenge is do the right thing, the thought was a lot of people might make a pin um, in honor of Bruce. And Bruce taught me quite a bit over the years, so it's kind of an honor to do this. I'm basically going to go over the different types of approaches to making a pin. I'm going to talk about the kits. I'm going to talk about alternatives to kits, and then I'm going to do a little demo on how to do a pin without buying all the pin turning paraphernalia that we usually end up buying. But if you get into pin turning, generally you start out with kits, and kits can range from, they're usually broken down by ball points, which is a cross refill or a Parker refill. Then you can get into roller balls, which is a fancier writing instrument. And then you can get into fountain pens. And the cost for kits can range anywhere from $3 or $4 to up to 80 or 90 bucks. So you can really get into some high level stuff. This is a slimline kit. It's one of the cheapest ones. It's one that a lot of people start with because it's a cheap kit. But it's also one of the most difficult kits to do because you're usually dealing with a pretty small diameter at the end. I'll pass that around. And that uses a cross type refill. It's a ballpoint. The pin I'm going to talk about doing tonight the most is a Wall Street 2, which is a version of Sierra pins. It's really, in my mind, one of the easiest pins to make. The Wall Street 2 is what Woodcraft sells. This one has a barrel that's already turned. And when I get to the point tonight where I show you how to assemble one, I'm going to assemble this, so I'll pass that around. When you're doing a kit pin, you're usually using bushings. The bushings will give you the final diameter of your barrel. Each different type of kit generally comes with its own unique bushings. You generally turn them on a mandrel. The bushings will slide on here, the tube of the pin will slide over that, and then you just turn it down to the dimension of the bushing. Most pin mandrels come with a little screw attachment to tighten everything down. Unfortunately, I will over tighten it. If you over tighten it, you'll end up bending your mandrel. So this is what's called a mandrel saver, which just puts pressure right up on it. It's a live center. So that will help save your mandrel if you want to do mandrel turning. So that's turning a mandrel based pin with kits, with bushings is usually pretty straightforward. And that's what most turners will do. The next approach to making a pin is to, rather than stick with a kit, is take the kit and put some modifications to it. Give it your own little flair, your own little creativity. This is a pretty standard slimline pin. This is one where I've lengthened the lower barrel, put in my own center band, if you will, on the top of it, done away with the center band that came on the pin, but it just gives it a little different appearance. So you can do modifications to your kits to kind of give them their own flair. This is a wood pin, this is an acrylic pin. So you can see two types of materials for the barrels as well as a way to do the modifications. I like doing a lot of modifications just to make it interesting. Now, if you get beyond a modified pin, then you get into kitless pins. And kitless pins are where you start spending money on taps and dies, and it can get really complicated. This is a kitless pin with a nib that I bought and a clip that I bought, but everything else has basically been made and used taps and dies and so forth. I even cast these blanks because I was trying to get a sort of a different look. So that's an example of a Kitless pin. When you get into the different materials you can turn, you've got wood, of course. I got acrylics, where you can just have straight colored acrylics like that. Or you can get into casting labels, casting postage stamps. You can take a photograph, you cast that. So if you go down the casting route, and you can get into all kinds of stuff. This one is abalone strips that I glued on the pin barrel and then cast it and then turned it. So you can do all sorts of crazy stuff when you get into the casting. So there are several different black holes you can fall into as you get into pin turning. You can also turn antler.
When you turn that antler, did you have to fill it, or was it solid?
You know, on this one, it had some pith on the outside of it. The issue with antler is if you can get away from the pith, then you don't really have to do much with it. I think the pith actually gives a little bit of character on it. The challenges with antler is drilling the holes, because you usually got a crooked piece, and be able to hold that and drill it, it can be a challenge. And plus, you know, antler is dangerous stuff to turn. You don't want to inhale the dust. So you definitely want to wear a respirator. What I will generally do if I'm turning antler is I'll put it between centers and turn it round on the end where I can chuck it up and drill it. That way I know where I'm drilling, and I'm not going to drill out the side of it. So that's a little trick I use. I've even turned stones with soapstone. That's a soapstone pin, which is also a challenge. Soapstone creates a lot of dust. That was a Kitless pin. And I put a precious metal clay roll stopper on it rather than a clip. Metal clay, I don't know if you've ever messed with precious metal clay, but it comes in a clay form. You shape it, you dry it, and then once it's dried, clean it up a little bit, and you either fire it in a kiln or fire it with a torch, and it will become the metal. Like this was bronze, and they have a sterling silver and so forth. So that's a good way to kind of do something a little bit different. I'm sorry? Yeah, it will. It will shrink, and that's the challenge. One of the challenges of working with metal clay is it's a little bit brittle. It's a little bit brittle, so you couldn't use it for like a clip. Yeah, because I thought about trying to do that, and I also made one that where the finial, I replaced it with a metal clay piece, and I took some give and take to get it to the right size. And like I've also tried to do like a center band, and getting that to the right size was also a challenge. You can also take watch parts and cast those. This is a Mickey Mouse watch face with the gears and so forth. And I powder coated the tubes, glued on the pin parts, and then cast it in acrylic and turned it. I won't go through all of these, but when you go down the casting route, it's kind of endless. You get into all kinds of goofy stuff. And if you're a segmenter, Jim's a really good segmenter. Jim does a lot of segmenting. I'm not so hot with segmenting, but that's an example of a segmented pin where you're basically gluing the pieces together. On this one, I put pieces of a Pepsi can or a beer can in between the segments to give it a little aluminum offset. The challenge I have with segmenting is gluing them together where they don't come apart when you start turning them.
Hey, could you hold that one up close to the camera? Okay, thanks very much.
You can also do Celtic knots. This one I was trying to do as many strands on the knot as I could. It's not exactly perfect, but it's pretty complex. And again, the challenge there is getting that glued together and staying together while you turn it, and not losing the little parts in the middle or getting it out of line where it's not lined up properly.
When Bruce gave a demo for pens, he was using the CNC.
Yeah.
Do you do that kind of stuff on the surface with the CNC if you're good at it?
Yeah, Bruce actually did a basket weave pattern, and then he came back and hand colored it. So he had a basket weave pin. Yeah, I think Jim has the same type of CNC setup. He and Bruce kind of developed it together. I'm not smart enough to do the CNC stuff. This is something I tried. It was a little bit different. I tried to do basket weave pyrography on it to give it a pattern. So, so pin turning is not just turning a piece of wood and ending up with a wooden pin. I mean, you can, and that's a good way to do it. And there are people make some really incredible wooden pins that, which to me is you get the right piece of wood. It's hard to beat a beautiful wooden pin. But if you want to get into just seeing how many different things you can do, pin turning is kind of endless. And that's why I find it very fascinating. There's several resources online. One is the International Association of Pin Turners. It's actually a group you can join. It's free. But you can also go to the App Store, for Apple or for your Android, and you can download the bushings in tubes reference material from the International Association of Pin Turners. And what that has, can you zoom in on the?
Yes, as it turns out, I can.
This one right here, the 30 caliber bolt action. You can look at that, and you can, if you have a particular kit and you want to know what the diameters are of the tubes, what the sizes are of the tubes, what the bushing sides are, you can go to that and you can find all the dimensions that you want to deal with. And where that's beneficial is if you want to get away from turning with bushings, that's a good resource for doing that. And I've also put together a list of suppliers and resources and everything that into the newsletter. There are any number of places you can go and buy pin kits. Woodcraft, of course, has plenty of pin kits. Woodcraft will have the pin mandrels, they'll have all that sort of stuff. The other thing that we'll often use with kits is a pin press. When you do a kit pin, you've got the components that you have to press into the tubes. And this is basically a device for pressing them in. You've got different settings for the different size tubes. And so you can set this up and press your parts together. So if you're going to do a lot of kit pins, this is something that's nice to have. Again, I'm going to show you how to assemble one without this. When you're drilling the tubes, drilling the holes for the tubes, it's really important that you have a good straight hole and it's not oblong or wobbling or what have you, because it's important to get that pin a good tight fit when you glue it in. You don't have it glued in properly, you can blow the barrel apart pretty easily, because a lot of times you're getting down to really, really thin barrels. I like drilling on the lathe. You can drill on a drill press with a pin vise, but to me, I never had a lot of luck with that. I'm going to show you how to do it with just a regular chuck, but you can also buy pin jaws to go in your chucks, and basically you're just holding your blank together and drilling it on the lathe. The other thing, if you want to get away from using bushings, it's to do turning between centers. So you usually have a dead center. This is a 60-degree dead center, and then a live center. And you'll also need calipers. To get your barrel dimensions, and I'll show you how I do that. In terms of what tool do you turn it with, it's whatever you feel good with. I've turned them with a big roughing gouge. I've turned them with a small skew. Recently, I've been turning with a Sorby micro gouge. I mean, not micro gouge, micro roughing gouge. So I bought the little gouge, and then I made myself a handle. So that's sort of what I like to use to turn pins, and you can do your roughing, you can do your final passes with that as well. But it's basically whatever you feel comfortable with. You can turn them with a spindle gouge. You can turn them with these easy wood tools with the carbides and so forth. I keep forgetting we have an online audience. I got it online. They probably sell them here though. I don't. You want to make sure your tool is good and sharp. In the plastics, there are a range of different ones. Some are chippier than others. I mean, so I wouldn't jump into plastics right away. I'd make sure I had my techniques pretty good and solid with my tool techniques. Finishing the plastics a little bit different. Usually are wet sanding with a micro mesh or sponges. What do you call those things, Jim? Micro mesh. Okay.
Yeah, I've got a problem with plastics. When I was drilling for the barrel, when I get right down to the bottom, it would blow out.
Yeah. Okay. The question was, when you're drilling plastics, you sometimes have problems blowing out the end of it. I think one thing, you may be drilling too fast. The other is, for plastics, sometimes just leave them long. So when you drill through it, if you blow it out, you're not going to blow it out past where the tube is going to be. But in the other issue with drilling plastics, if you drill too fast, it'll get hot and your bit will stick. And when that happens, it's just a really pain in the butt. Well, it may have happened to me once or twice. When I first started doing, I did everything at high speed. Yeah, so I drill all my holes at a low speed.
Don't try to drill a whole pin blank at one time either.
Well, usually you don't have enough travel on your tailstock.
I did it on a metal lathe.
Yeah.
You got the bit stuck up in.
Yeah, I mean, so plastics can be challenging to drill. And the other aspect, I didn't mention it, but with casting, you can also do tube in casting. So you cast around the tube if you have a special mold to do that. So you can do that as well. Let's see if I've talked about everything I want to talk about before I do the demo. Well, if I think of something as I'm going along, I'll tell you, but I'm going to show you how to drill using a regular chuck. And I've got a Jacobs chuck that I use. The Wall Street 2 that I'm going to turn tonight is Uses a 27/64 drill bit. So basically, I've made sure I've got good square cuts on my blank. And I'll put it in here between the corners of the jaws and push it back to where it's touching the base of the chuck. So it should be fairly good and square. And then I'll basically just run up, and I've got it on the lowest speed, which is 500 RPMs. And I'll just go at it pretty slow. And with plastics, as well as antler or anything else, you want to clear your bit pretty often. Otherwise, it'll get built up and clogged up and seize up. I haven't. Do you? You do it all the time? Just because of the noise, or just for makes it easier? Okay, so it's drilled. So when I go to glue the tube in, I like to use a 5-minute epoxy. And what I will do is I will take the tube, and I use plumber's putty. You can use Play-Doh, you can use anything, and get it. And on my lathe, which I thought I would have here, I have a punch out tool that's really good for packing this epoxy in. It'll work. So I just fill one end of the tube up with plumber's putty because I don't want to get glue inside of that tube. You get glue inside of that tube when if you don't get it cleaned out well. When you start pressing the parts in, you can split out your barrel. And and so it's that helps keep it clean.
Using the wax coating, the thin wax comes in real thin sheets.
No, I'm not really familiar with it.
Yeah, Dean Cox had a bunch of it. And it's just little thin plastic sheets, and he was laying them on the table and just sticking the pins down in the plastic
And doing that?
Yep.
Huh. Yeah.
Or a slice of potato.
Oh yeah, a slice of potato would do it. Anything to fill that hole. Then what I will do is I'll mix my epoxy up. I'm not going to glue one here. It's just kind of want to make a mess. I'll take a pipe cleaner, get it all good coverage throughout inside of the holes. Then I'll put a little bead around the tube, and I'll just push it in. And I usually use like a popsicle stick to mix my epoxy, and then I'll just kind of wipe it off the ends. And so once it sets up, I don't, but a lot of people do. I've had sometimes you'll get them release like with CA glue or something. Some people use Gorilla Glue. The issue I've had with Gorilla Glue is as it expands, it'll push your tube out sometimes. So you've got to find some way of securing it into the blank. So once you've got your tube glued into your blank, then you want to trim off these ends, and you want to trim them off until they're flush with your tube and that they're perfectly square with the tube. That's important to have a good fit with your pin parts. There's a couple of different ways of doing that, trimming them off. The easiest, and this is again something you would buy, is a barrel trimmer. And you can buy barrel trimmer sets that come with different sizes and sleeves and so forth, where you could to match your various pin kits. My plumber's putty had dried up a little bit there. But basically, you go into the tube and you trim it down until you get to see the shiny brass on the end of it. I don't know if you can see this shiny brass, but the way you can do it without having a barrel trimmer is we'll go back to our chuck, and I'm going to use my live center to get it in and get it squared up. So when I do go to sand it, I'm sanding it fairly square. So I basically just go in and chuck it up, make sure it's square. And I'll come back. And I got a really high-tech trimmer here. Piece of wood, a piece of sandpaper. And I'll just sort of run it up, not tight, but run it up until it's kind of snug against it. And I'll do that. And then and it helps if you've trimmed your barrel pretty close. See, I've already got it down to the brass there. So, I mean, it's not ideal because you can get a little rounding, but in a pinch, if you don't want to have the barrel trimmers, that's one way of doing it. Okay.
You're doing this, are you doing one pin at a time, or you got this thing set up and you're doing 8 or 10 of them at a time?
Well, I'm not a production turner. I'm not into selling them or anything. I'm usually playing or experimenting. So I do one at a time. And a lot of times
Is this pin gonna have one blank?
the Wall Street 2 has only one barrel. Yeah, it's a nice simple pin. It's a neat pin. It's very functional. You can use it for a lot of different things. So this is turning between centers. So you basically put it between your dead center and your live center. Sure.
I see it all right up there.
I like to turn them fairly fast. Can I have my tool back?
No, it's gone.
It's gone. I got a pen back too. And so I'll set my calipers to the bushing diameter. And for the Wall Street 2, it's 0.474. And it's very hard for me to get it exactly. That's 4745. It's close enough. So I'll put this where it's handy. Yeah. Hopefully I don't do a lot of sanding, but. Now you can have, when you're doing a pin, you can have some design flexibility. You can do different contours on your barrel, as long as your ends line up with the pin components or the bushings. So if you don't want a straight pin, you can give it a little convex or concave shape, whatever you want to do. So I'm round. After I get it round, I'll go back and I'll kind of lay it up to eyeball how far I've got to go. So. And at this point, I usually start working on the ends and working back to the center.
Hi, everybody. Hi.
You're using the back of the blade, the back of the cutting blade?
I'm using the wings a lot, and sometimes I'll try to ride the bevel, coming down into here. Sometimes I just use the end of it too. So I'm getting pretty close right there. Still got a little ways to go there. So I keep creeping up on it. Upside down.
Your blade's 180 degrees from what I would think would be.
I should have had my safety glasses on. See, this side here is pretty well down to the dimension, but this side here still has a ways to go.
Trying to get a bevel to it, or is it trying to be straight?
I'm trying to just leave a little. That's just sort of my preference. Some people like to go straight. Some people, some people will even do all sorts of stuff with them. That's how you can give them a little bit of character. You see, I've got a pretty good cut with that. I'm not going to have to do a lot of sanding. A lot of people will, when they get close to the end, they'll start sanding. And if you're using bushings, one of the mistakes that you can run into is sanding into your bushing and dragging metal back into your wood. It does two things. It messes up your finish. It also ruins your bushings eventually. Eventually, your bushings will be the wrong side. So, that's one of the dangers of trying to sand to your final dimension, especially if you're using bushings. So I try to cut as close as I can. So that, I've got it turned pretty well down to the dimensions. And so when I want to go to sanding, I'll turn my speed down. This is set up so just not different enough from mine to where I'm confusing myself. Yeah. So again, I've gone back to 500 and I'm going to start sanding a 400 on this one because it's close enough. I mean, you can start sanding in whatever level you feel comfortable with. For wood, I usually don't go beyond 400. For acrylics, I'll go to, using a micro mesh all the way through the meshes. That way you can get a good polished surface. And then once you've done the micro mesh, put a plastic polish on it and give it a shine. So what I usually do is just do that. And then come back and just lightly get any sanding marks out of it like that. And that's basically ready for finish there. You can finish them in any number of ways. A lot of people will use multiple applications of CA glue. You can get a really high gloss finish when you do that. I personally don't like the CA finish. To me, it makes a wooden pin look like a plastic pin. But if that's what you're going for, that's, and a lot of times if you're into selling pins, that's what's going to sell. I'm a wood guy. I like to see the wood. You can use friction polishes. You can use wax. You can use, there's a product Woodcraft sells called Pins Plus, which is a friction polish, which is a nice finish. I've been playing with a variation of OB Shine Juice, which is a mixture of shellac. There's different formulations. The one I've been using is a mixture of shellac, denatured alcohol, and mineral oil. The formula is 1 part, 1 part, 1 part. I've done 2 part shellac, 1 part, 1 part of the others. To me, that gives you a little harder and shinier finish. And so usually just apply a coat, kind of let it soak in a little bit.
Once you get the dark brown in there, the 3 things that you just mentioned are all almost clear.
My shellac was old and it's turned. Yeah. So after it soaks in a little bit, I'll just come back and apply it with a friction type motion. And I'll put like, yeah, I mean, normally I would turn it up a little bit, but it'll do it. This stuff dries pretty quickly. I mean, you can see it's already starting to shine. And I'll use 5 or 6 applications of that. And the other thing about the shellac is it does darken the wood a little bit. Even fresh shellac will darken the wood a little bit. The formula actually calls for, instead of mineral oil, calls for boiled linseed oil. And I went to the mineral oil trying to lighten it up a little bit. Yeah. Yeah. You can see, I don't know if you can see it, but you can get a little, you just get a little shine on your paper towel when you start applying it. And it's better to use a decent paper towel. You don't want the cheap ones, Bounty or something like that. They seem to, for whatever reason, do a little bit better. That's at 500. It's better to do it at a little higher speed. But I mean, I'll pass this around. It's got a pretty decent finish on it.
That is your finish, that is your friction coat right there?
Yeah.
Where you're gonna put the friction on?
That's it.
Something else.
That's it. Now, if you wanted to, you can go back and buff it with carnauba wax or whatever.
All kinds of friction.
Shellac and then black.
Yeah, I've tried that too. I didn't feel like I got much of a gloss, and it didn't seem like it would hold up that well to me. Yeah, I've tried it. I've experimented with it, and then I liked it because it was a clearer finish, but it didn't seem to have the lasting power that I was looking for. Now, to assemble the pin, I basically just made myself a couple of little pieces of wood that'll fit into my MT2 taper. I put a little bevel on one side just to help keep stuff straight. What I like about the Wall Street 2 is you only have to press in one part, you know, as opposed to some you'll have to press in two parts on each end.
Anybody got experience with, can you go to use CA glue for glue boots? I mean, because I get basically my bushings coated, and then it almost seals it,
Yeah,
you know, and then you pull it apart, and then you got a rough edge, it's no good.
yeah.
Anybody got any good experience with that?
Well, you can get Del rim bushings or make your own Del rim bushings,
Did that.
and that they still you didn't like it. I mean, that's one of the reasons I don't like CA. And plus, when you're doing it and it's generating heat and giving off the odor, it irritates my sinuses. So I'm just not a CA finish fan.
You made this look easy. I always thought the CA glues make it fast. But you made that real fast.
No, the CA, to do CA properly, it's not fast. I mean, it's multiple coats, it's sanding in between. Some of the guys that do the really high gloss finish will do it forwards and in reverse. I mean, the finishing for those guys is probably longer than the turning the pin. The other nice thing about the Wall Street 2 kit is the bottom part, basically, you put your refill in, you put your transmission in, you screw it together, and the bottom's assembled. You can slide it into your tube, you can check your fit. And if you feel like your fit's not good, you can go back and adjust it on the lathe a little bit, unless you've overturned it. So that's one advantage of that. This is the Wall Street 2 Elegant, which is a little fancier version of the Wall Streets. And Steve bought, you mind?
Yeah.
Steve bought a kit that came with 2 Wall Street pins, a 27/64 drill bit, the bushings, and some extra tubes. You know, so that,
Whole thing, you got 10% discount versus tax is $33.
and that's just a little bit more than what 2 kits would cost you.
They're a whole stack.
You're doing
What's the difference between the Wall Street 2 and the Wall Street
Wall Street 3 is a thicker barrel. I think, so it's more forgiving, but you're going to end up with a thicker pin. And it's different bushings and all that stuff. So, if you're looking for a particular one, you got to pay attention to the 2s or the 3s or whatever. So
Just to amplify it, one end does bottle caps or wash parts or things of that nature that are by nature thicker. You want to use the Wall Street 3, or if it's found, and there are certain ones where the barrel is fatter. In other words, the difference between the barrel and the 2 gives you more room.
yeah, like if
That'd be for casting, of course. It wouldn't apply to the wood.
yeah, it's like this one where I've taken a pressed penny and put it on a copper weave. If I were going to do that on this type of pin, I'd use a Wall Street 3 because you got a bit, thicker barrel width, and you can cast it and not turn into whatever it is you're trying to cast. So this, to assemble the Wall Street 2, both ends are the same. Some kits, the top and the bottom are different, so you got to be careful in what you're lining up and putting together and so forth. This one, I'll take a look at my blank, and if I've got any little flaws or something I want to hide behind a clip, I'll line it up where that's lined behind the clip. And so then I'll basically come back here and use my tailstock. And you want to make sure you're putting it in there straight. If you go sideways, you can bust out the side of your barrel. So I'll just screw my pin stock up till it's good and tight. And I've pressed my pin together. In the Wall Street 2, you got a pin. This is talking about casting. This is sweet gum balls that I got out of the yard. I dried them in the toaster oven, then I cast them in acrylic. Kind of gives you an interesting pattern.
So on this type of pen, the bottom section is part of the pen.
Yeah. Yeah, it comes in 3 pieces. You just put your refill in and screw your transmission on. That's all there is to assemble it. And then the top piece will be your cap of the clip, and that's the only part you press in. And you've got press parts on both sides. You can do the same thing with those. And you can, if you put a little dimple in there to keep it from sliding around, it helps you keep it straight. So that's homemade pin press.
Some of the fancier pen kits can you turn 2 pieces?
Yeah, like the cigar pins, the capped pins, you're turning 2 pieces. Like on this one, you'd have to press in this piece, you have to press in this piece, press in this piece, press in this piece. So there are a lot of parts you'd be pressing together. And pressing pins together can be a point where you run if you go in there at a little bit of an angle, or if you haven't cleaned your glue out of your tube really good, you can pop that pin barrel real easily. Yeah. So. What the kit came with those already threaded. Yeah, so this is a more expensive kit, but you've got the Wall Street version is a navigator, and it'll come in 2 parts, and you can either get a roller ball or a fountain pen.
I think there was a cigar tool that came like this too. That's what a Wall Street too.
Yeah, this is a cigar pen. And so the cigar, you've got 2 parts pressed together.
When you're making your own blanks in acrylic, you got a vacuum. You got a vacuum to do that.
I made a homemade pressure plot using a Harbor Freight paint sprayer. I'm not a real big fan of it. But a lot of the resins, you don't have to use a pressure plot. And I'll tend to go to those resins rather than one I have to use a pressure pot for.
So I don't know much about doing resins. How many varieties or what's going on with resins?
It's tons. There's a polyester resin, which is probably the cheapest, but it's also one of the more brittle. If you're doing something other than pins, like if you wanted to try to put resins in a bowl or something, it will shrink when it dries. So a lot of times you'll get a gap with wood if you're trying to do something like that. If you're trying to do a hybrid cast, you might not get as much adhesion to the wood that you would like. There are urethane resins. There's aluminite, which is aluminite, which you have to use a pressure pot for to get it to set up properly. There, the various epoxy resins, you can even use a tabletop epoxy. There's stuff called liquid diamonds, which is really good, but it's also expensive. And some resins work better for some applications than others do. If I'm going to do a watch part pin, I'm going to use liquid diamonds because there's so much time invested in getting those parts glued on there and everything else. I don't want to screw it up with a PR resin.
Source for that information?
I didn't put that in the list. What I can do is I can add it to the sheet that I want to give for the newsletter, and put a source for that.
What's the one that Joanne's Fabric carries? It's in a purple.
Yeah, I forget what it's called. It's casting something, but it's a polyester resin.
I've used that.
Yeah,
That's the only thing I ever used.
I mean it's fine for it if you wanted to just do your own colored blanks. If you
I bought my pigments on Amazon. I think I got 32 colors for $20 maybe.
Yeah, you can go on eBay and buy cosmetic powders real cheap and do all sorts of different colors of blanks and so forth.
No, I cast mine round in PVC. I made a holder for 1-inch PVC. And
Yeah.
I cast them in that and don't have to use a pressure pot and just set them in there with a latex glove, rubber banded around the end of it.
Yeah, well, I put a wine cork in the end of it and just poured it down against the wine cork.
Comes out of the PVC?
Easy.
Easy.
Really?
Yeah. This one I bought aluminum honeycomb and poured my resin down into the honeycomb and poured it, which I feel like it gives it a really neat appearance, but it's also a real challenge to turn because those little pieces want to pop out of that honeycomb. And you want to do something to etch that aluminum so it'll stick better too. I bought some of the, I'm not sure I would use the same thing again. It was Cred Cutter. But I think I'd want to go with something a little bit stronger if I were to do it again. Because I mean, I've had a number of those fly apart because they didn't stick well. Yeah, that'd be or I've even thought about lye, but that'd probably eat it completely up. Yeah.
You don't have to, you're a acid, you buy it down, it's like 30%. You could dilute it down. I use that for my sidewalk. That's really, you want the higher concentration for that.
I mean, I'll pass this around as just an example of different pins. I mean, these are Kitless on the end. This is one I turned out of aluminum, which, I mean, for having a nice sturdy pin, that's aluminum is pretty easy to turn on a wood lathe. This is one I did a label casting of a picture of either Chief Joseph or Sitting Bull or somebody. This one I've done seashells and shark's teeth you know, so it's a variety of things you can do. And that's where I find pin turning to be very interesting, because you can just do all sorts of crazy stuff. And I generally just do it to see how many different kinds of things I can do. So
I don't know much about the ink pen itself portion. You got roller ball.
you got roller balls.
Is that the better of the options?
It's
Pick up a ballpoint pen, it's a bit, it goes.
well, you know, it's a matter of personal preference. A lot of people like the roller balls because it's a nice, smooth, flowing writer. I don't particularly like roller balls myself because it'll bleed through certain papers. Then you have people that are really into fountain pens. And if you get into fountain pens and you get into Kitless and so forth, you can buy all sorts of different nibs, very expensive nibs or whatever, to do your fountain pens with. There's yes. Let me pass them around to everybody. I mean, this is there it is. This is one of Woodcraft's fountain pens that I don't know that it's a very popular kit, but I like it in terms of the nib and the writing. It's one of Woodcraft's, I think it's called an Atra, maybe something like that. But they're, you know, yeah, they haven't. I think I bought this one out here. So, I mean, there's any number of things you can do with pens. You know, if you want to just, if I did only wood pens, I would probably get bored with it. But by seeing how many different crazy things I can do with it, it's always a challenge for me. So.